to get started. Okay, perfect. Now you guys will not be in the picture over there, but I'll be able to get your voices if necessary. Don't try to get into the picture. It's perfect. I'm not going to go beyond this little area right here, okay? All right, in your hand you have a 20-page review that we will go over today in fairly good detail. Martine, if you will also take one to Shy and for me as well, and then also Lindsay in the back corner, okay? There you go, perfect, thank you. Get ready, buckle in, here we go. In starting off the class, we talked about the definition of real property. Do you remember the significance of the definition of land? Land includes not just what you're standing on, but it also includes to the center of the earth, to the highest heavens. By this point, hopefully you can relate that to the concept of an appurtenance. Things that are attached to the land that run with the land, okay? Do you remember the significance of this when we're talking about things like oil, mineral, and gas rights? Oil, mineral, and gas rights go with the property, but remember that appurtenances are separable rights. They can be removed. For example, do you remember if I sell a property to you where I have leased the oil rights for 40 years, you can buy the property from me, but you buy the property subject to the lease of the 40-year oil rights. Does that sound familiar to you? Definition of real property, land improvements, rights and privileges, all the way to the center of the earth. You can see that language repeated there. I would highly recommend that as you're studying this, if you see something with an asterisk beside it, you take that as being pretty serious. Notice right at the bottom of that little section with real estate, it's just a reminder here. This should not confuse you on the national exam, but they may use the word improvement and treat it as an appurtenance. What does an improvement have in common with an appurtenance? It runs with the land. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to tell you there? Physical and economic characteristics of the land. Spend a minute on these. This is only level 1. But physical characteristics, it's immobile, it's permanent, and it's unique. And remember the concept of specific performance in chapter 10, contracts. You know, because real estate is unique, if you try to sell me a piece of property and then after we go into contract, you try to back out, I could sue you for the right to buy the property from you. Specific performance doesn't mean you're giving me the property. It means you're specifically performing the contract as written. Sound good? And then, of course, the economic characteristics you see there as well. Personal property. Do you remember the concept of chattel? The word chattel to you, it's just a vocabulary word. But what's the significance of personal property? It doesn't go with the real property unless you ask for it specifically in the contract. Does that sound about right? Okay, chattel. See that word? We'll get back to the UCC effect in just a moment. Uniform commercial property. Uniform commercial code. Fructus industrialis versus fructus naturalis. These are vocabulary words to you, okay? Fruits of the soil, fruits of industry versus fruits of nature. Do you remember in other words for fruits of industry? And you see it underlined right there. You see the word implements. What did I tell you about E-words? It's time for you to develop strategies as you're studying. Not just do I understand these words, but what other words could trick me? Implements, crops in the field. Do you remember crops in the field? One growing season, so they're not real property. They're considered personal property of the person who planted them. You remember that? I love it coming back, hopefully. Fixtures. Clearly you understand at this point, there is no way you are not getting tested on fixtures, and there's no way it's not going to be a hard question, and I honestly believe that you're going to get it if you did well on the practice exams. Fixtures. Once it is a fixture, you understand it's real property at that point. It used to be personal property. It's now real property because it's attached, right? The most important determining factor, I often say, is what the contract says. If the contract says it's a fixture, then by God, it's a fixture. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to go back and you're going to study the contract, not to memorize, but to familiarize yourself with the things that are considered fixtures in the contract, okay? Do that for me. And if it's one of those, it definitely goes with the property. Now remember, as you're reading the question, what are we going to test you on in regards to fixtures? First of all, is it a fixture? But then, did the seller accept it? Because remember, if the seller says everything except that chandelier in the dining room, then what they're saying is it's not going to go with the property. And you remember this as well. In the fixture, I don't care how sentimental it is to you. I don't care how much you paid for it. All I care is it attached to that house and does the contract say it's a fixture, okay? You remember the little kid's mailbox? It's sentimental to mom or grandma. The fact of the matter is it's attached to that house, and so it's going to be real property, a fixture. You're going to get it. And then notice, regarding fixtures, how do you accept a fixture? Short answer is you write it in the contract. Take it out. Is fixture real or personal property? By the time it's attached, it is real property. You feel good about that? Trade fixtures. You're not staying up late at night. You're not staying up late at night on trade fixtures. Trade fixtures necessary for the conduct of my business. Okay? There are things that I put there. I would say get some examples of these. Go back to your book and just look at some common examples they gave. In a pizza restaurant, the pizza oven would be a fixture. I gave you an example of slat wall in my retail store. That was a trade fixture. And remembering trade fixtures, here's the key. When the tenant leaves, they can take trade fixtures with them, and it's going to be safe to assume for test purposes that when you left, you did not tear up the guy's property, you didn't tear up the landlord's property, and you paid your rent on time. Take your trade fixtures with you. Make sense? It's about what you remember. And then, let's see, I have an asterisk here, so let's see. The tenant may remove trade fixtures that they installed. It sounds like what I just said, so I'm okay on that point as well. UCC, you're not staying up late at night on the UCC as well, but the Uniform Commercial Code, remember how it relates. An item that appears to be a fixture remains personal property until the financier is paid off. Now remember, in a UCC filing, I'm not talking about something that's on your credit card or something like that. I'm talking about the financier. Joe's HVAC company, they financed it for you. What did they have to do? They went to the Register of Deeds, and then they had to record a UCC filing. Do you remember words like financing statement, security instrument? If you see those, basically what Joe was saying is, until you finish paying me off, I can come back and take that. Listen closely. UCC filing, is it a lien on the house? No, it's a lien on the fixture, sometimes referred to as a chattel mortgage. Two words that go together there. Boom, congratulations, that's page 1. You already got those ones. All right, on to the next page. We're talking about the powers of government. Sometimes I teach it this way in class, sometimes I forget to, but I do like this from an acronym standpoint. Powers of the government. I know that you own your property in your name, but having said that, the government has powers in your property that can be expressed with the acronym P. Please note each one of these, examples of each one, and how they relate to each other. For example, the P stands for police powers. Remember zoning. I mean, clearly, zoning is probably your most common version of the police powers of the state. But don't forget, in there as well, building codes, for example, would fall into this category. The government has a right for the health, safety, welfare of the citizens to implement building codes. Sound good? And then, of course, watch out for this one. If you ever see the word subdivision regulation or subdivision ordinance, don't forget that's a public restriction. Don't focus on subdivision, focus on ordinance or regulation, right? And what that does is it governs how subdivisions are formed. Don't confuse that with covenants, okay? And then on the first E, eminent domain. Eminent domain, the right of the government to take private property for public use by offering just compensation. Eminent domain, please know the 3 tenets of eminent domain. Taking a private property, public use, just compensation. But remember, that's the right of the government. And then the actual act of taking the property is condemnation. Remember how those words go together, okay? Taxation, good news, bad news type situation. Bad news is there's a ton of questions we could ask you on taxation. Good news is by this point you have heard them 1,000 times. Taxation, we're talking about your real property taxation. We're talking about this a real property exam. Real property taxation, it's done locally. If you're in the city limits, you're going to have county and city, right? You remember the formula, assessed value divided by 100 times the tax rate in North Carolina. Okay? How are we going to try to trick you on assessed value? We may try to make you think market value. We may try to make you think appraised value or sale price. But you are taxed on your assessed value, right? Please pay close attention to your timeline, your tax timeline. When are real property taxes always due? If you say anything other than September 1st, I'm going to throw this orange at you. Real property taxes are due when? September 1st. I know no one ever pays them then, but it doesn't change the answer to that question. Be careful with this one. Be careful with this one. Real property taxes constitute a lien against your property as of January 1st of the tax year. Literally before you ever received a bill, they were already a lien on your property, what we call an involuntary lien. You didn't ask for it, it just showed up, right? Not to be confused with this question. Your real property taxes are considered to be late after January 5th of the following year. Do you understand what I'm looking out for you on that? So read that careful closely. On taxation, I think you have a chance of getting 2 or 3 points just on answering the questions. Just make sure you read the questions correctly. Another example of that is this. How often must your property be reevaluated for tax purposes? At least once every 8 years. It could be more, but it can't be less than once every 8 years in North Carolina. Under what act starting with the letter M? Under the Machinery Act, that is the case. All right? Now, how often can your tax rate be changed? Every year. Again, it sounds like you got this stuff. Make sure you read the question closely and know where the tricks are. Taxation. Get yourself some key points there. And then escheat. Escheat is a power of the government as well. But look at what has to happen. For the government to get your property through escheat, you have to have died under real property. Not only did you not have a will, but you also did not have any heirs. Right? So that is the only time that the property will escheat to the state. But if you ever see the word escheat, it's another one of those E words. If you ever see the word escheat, you understand that that is the process of it going to the state. You didn't have a will, you didn't have heirs. It had to go somewhere. Okay? Police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat. Now, let me give you one high-level point here, a little bit of a long shot for test purposes, but on the state side, you might see something like this. One of the main technical differences between the police powers and eminent domain, if your property loses value because you were downzoned because of an action under the police powers, are you entitled to any compensation? No, but under eminent domain, if the government takes your property, are you entitled to compensation? Yes, kind of a high-level technical distinction there if we decide to go that route. Oh my gosh, we were doing so well, and then we hit estates and real property. Estates and real property. But listen, guys, it's time. This is not amateur attorney time, okay? We need to focus on what do I need to know? What do I really, at the end of the day, need to know about each of these? So remember, at the time I taught estates and real property, I put them into kind of a hierarchy. Some are better than others. And here's what I want in your mind when you think about why some are better than others. The ones that are the best are ones that you own and you have a right to leave to your heirs without conditions. That would be the best one. So therefore, the greatest estate of ownership in real property is the fee simple absolute. What makes it the greatest? Because I own it and I can leave it to my heirs forever, literally, if they choose not to sell it. All right, be careful here. Ready to be careful here? Fee simple absolute. Does that mean it doesn't have any liens on it? Nothing could be farther than the truth. Mine's eat up with liens, but it's still fee simple absolute. Okay? Let's give you something to compare to. Those defeasible fee estates. Now listen, this is like a level 1, like a level 10 concept that we only test to level 1. Why is a defeasible fee estate less desirable than a fee simple absolute? It has a what starting with the letter C, which could result in what starting with the letter R. It has a condition which, if broken, could result in reversion. Do you understand how those terms go together? Bless you. Bless you again. Now stop. All right. If you understand how those words go together, you're going to be in pretty decent shape. Now listen, I have been told that it's possible that they will ramp it up just a little bit on the defeasible fee estates. Do you remember that a couple of type of estates that they talked about within the category of defeasible fee estates? There was a fee simple determinable, and there was a fee simple condition subsequent. Listen, not attorney time, simple. It's just one word. In the fee simple determinable, you're to understand that if the condition is broken, that the reversion will be what? Starting with the letter A. Automatic. But in a condition subsequent, if the condition is broken, then the grantor would actually have to step back in and exercise their legal rights to get the property back. You with me, RC? Okay. And that's it. Listen, don't worry about money. Don't worry about, well, golly, is there going to be a court case and all this type of stuff? No, and yes. I mean, the determinable's automatic, condition subsequent. You're going to have to step in and exercise your legal rights. Okay? Let me add these two words to your list because you're taking a national exam as well. Not in class, but once you pass my class and go take the national portion. If you ever see the words base, B-A-S-E, or qualified, these are just other words for defeasible fee estates. If you ever see the word base or qualified on the national exam, it's just referring to a defeasible fee estate. That will be sufficient, if you see it at all, to get you past that point. Let me remind you, why are we spending any time at all talking about defeasible fee estates when you are not likely to see these in your real estate career, just to show you why they are lesser estates. Are defeasible fee estates inheritable? Yes, because the word fee denotes what? Inheritability. It just has a condition in it. Okay? Stay right there for the test and you're going to be perfect. Another temptation right here, guys. I know you're going to be tempted to try to beat this thing to death, but don't. On the life estate per OTRV, the life estate per OTRV, let me remind you what I want you to know about the life estate per OTRV. Okay? Life estate per OTRV is both freehold and inheritable. Let's go all the way back to chapter 2 and see if you can remember what I said about its inheritability. I said it was freakishly inheritable. It's freakishly inheritable. Do you remember A to B for the life of C and then D? Let's listen to it again. A to B for the life of C. So in other words, C is just a clock. They're just a measure in life. Is C ever going to own this property? They are never going to own this property. The minute that C dies, who's this property going to go to? D. The minute that B dies, if C is still alive, who is it going to go to? His heirs. Why? Because it's an inheritable estate. What inheritability means is if I die, it goes to my heirs. Okay? Those are the only pieces of information I even want you to know about this. It's freehold, it's inheritable. When C dies, it's going to D. Incidentally, does anybody remember what D is called? A remainder man. A remainder man. Okay? But if freakishly, if B were to predecease C, it's going to go to B's heirs. And how long will B's heirs own this property? Until C dies. And then you stop. Don't go any farther than that in studying for the test. Now let me remind you, in my hierarchy, everything we've talked about so far was freehold and inheritable. Would you agree with that? Yeah, weirdly enough, they're freehold and inheritable. You just see those conditions in the defeasible and the per OTRV that make them a little bit less desirable. Okay? Good, good. And then, the line that I'm getting ready to cross, is, we're now talking about freehold. Remember, freehold means ownership, but not inheritable. Fortunately for you guys, it's a category of one. It's a category of one. A traditional, a conventional life estate. Okay? Am I still following the outline? Okay, good, good. Conventional life estate, A to B, and then C. A to B, all right, let's listen closely. A to B for life, for B's life, right? A to B for B's life. And then when B dies, who's it going to? It's going to C. Who chose C? A chose C. Did B chose C? No, because it's not what? Inheritable. It's not inheritable. C, you said, was known as a what? Start with the letter R? Remainder man. What if A had simply said, A to B for life, and then when B dies, it goes to whom? Back to A, or whoever's in A's shoes, not in B's shoes. Okay? So A to B for life. Do you remember what this is called? It's a reversionary. Reversionary. Why do I bring up that petty point to you at all? I know it hasn't, I know it doesn't dawn on you guys. Having said this though, it does with me a little bit. The word reversion. Was the word reversion associated with a defeasible fee estate? Is it associated with a life estate? Do you know what? It's also associated with a non-freehold estate. Because if I lease property to you, I give up possession. But when you leave, what happens to possession? It reverts back to me. Relax your mind and understand the way reversion can come up multiple times on this test, and don't let that trick you. All right, I like where we are on that. I like where we are on that. I didn't spend a lot of time on marital estates, and that is by design, okay? How do I get a marital estate? And this is in the notes down here, okay? So don't worry about trying to take a lot of notes. The way I get a marital estate is I marry someone who already owns real property. Remember that? And where your mind's going on this is, it would have been different if I was married and then we acquired property. But in a marital life estate are technically death rights, right? Okay, they're technically death rights. I married someone who owns real property. We are living in that house, and then she dies. Do I now own the house? Not because of my marital interest. I mean, she could have left it to me in her will. I could be her only heir, and if that's the case, I would, in fact, own it. But the marital right is not an ownership interest, is it? It's a death right. I must be respected if, in fact, the titled spouse dies while I'm still married to her, okay? Just please understand this. When you marry someone who owns real property, you don't become the owner of that property. Gotcha? Okay. Then move on. Non-freehold estates, we literally just talked about these. Would it be okay with you if we just go through these very quickly and remind you that all I want you to know is an essential characteristic of the non-freehold estates? First of all, probably the most important thing that we're going to say is that the non-freehold, if freehold means ownership, then non-freehold means non-ownership. So realistically, we're talking possession. Have you ever had possession of a property that you did not own? And of course, that's exactly what a lease is, correct? Okay, so the non-freehold estates, in other words, it's leasehold estates. All right, little technical point right here. It's one of those things that's obvious, but if you've never heard it, it might not mean anything to you. Do you understand that if there is a non-freehold estate, that there are two estates going on simultaneously? Because if there's a non-freehold, someone still has to own it, right? So the landlord has a freehold estate, the tenant has a non-freehold estate, the landlord has given up a lease fee during that period of time to the tenant. So there's two estates going on simultaneously. Essential characteristic of each one: estate for years, fixed term, F-I-X-E-D, I feel confident I did use that. And the other caution I want to remind you on the estate for years is just simply this. It has nothing to do with time, does it? It could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a year, it could be 5 years. So don't get bogged down on the word estate for years. It's a fixed term lease, no rights of renewal. The example I often use in class is, of course, the vacation rental, because it's so easy to picture that. The estate from year to year, this one you're most familiar with, the idea that if you do not give notice, what's going to happen from a lease from year to year? It's going to automatically renew. Remember its other names, of course. Year to year, month to month, week to week. Periodic tenancies. Periodic tenancies have that characteristic, and it's the characteristic that's important. On a long shot here, if you would like to study the minimum notice to vacate, or at least understand the concept of the minimum notice to vacate being tied to the length of the tenancy, that is an endeavor worth at least remembering. Okay? Does that make sense? Don't worry about getting into too much detail, but understand that that's associated with a year to year. Is a minimum notice to vacate even associated with an estate for years? No, because it does what? Automatically terminates. That's the point I'm kind of trying to make on that. Estate at will, now listen, you're not going to get test questions about house sitting, right? That's the example I always use. So you say, why is an estate at will important for us in this class? Remember, an estate at will, how did the tenant get on the property? Legally. They got there legally, voluntarily. We agreed, and listen, for test purposes, don't worry about whether any money exchanged hands or not. Okay? When I allowed you to stay in my property and create a residence, a tenancy there, basically you have rights of a tenant, whether there's any money change hands or not, okay? Which means if I ever want you to leave and you don't go, what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to evict you. Okay, now state at will and eviction don't necessarily go together. What I'm saying is because you got there legally, you're not a what, starting with the letter T. A trespasser. That's the connection that I'm going for. You've heard that a couple of times by now, so hopefully you'll be all right on that. And then of course an estate at sufferance. Does anybody remember the other name that I gave the estate at sufferance? How I described the tenant as a what, starting with the letter H? He's a holdover, because if you remember the holdover tenant, it kind of explains what's going on here. They stayed beyond their lease and they won't leave. They didn't pay me rent and they won't leave. They're holding over. And as you just said, the only way to get rid of someone who's legally on your property is through the legal eviction process, which we will get to a little bit later when we get to chapter 10. As long as the wheels are a little bit wobbly, let's go ahead and knock out ownership of real property. You know what's funny, we don't spend a whole lot of time talking about the word severalty because I assume it's so easy. But remember, be familiar with the word severalty. Derives from the word to sever. Okay, severalty, only one name on the deed. You remember that? All right, trick question, trick question. I own property in severalty, and then I get married. How do I now hold title to that property? It's still in severalty, it's just that my wife now has a marital right. Stop. That's exactly perfect. Okay? All right, let's get to the ones that are a little more complicated. Tenancy in common, I have often described as being the default for unmarried persons acquiring property together. Tenancy in common, the default for unmarried persons acquiring property together. What do I mean by the default? If people that are not married buy property and they do not state otherwise in the deed, they are going to get tenancy in common. Are you with me on that? Are you with me on this? Many times throughout this class, I have suggested to you that when you're talking about tenancies, put everything out of your mind except what happens when there's a life-changing event. Okay? 3 tenants in common. If I want to sell my share of the tenancy in common, who can I legally share it to? Anybody I want to. I choose to sell it to Jen. Jen buys my 1/3 tenancy in common with these guys right here. She becomes a what? Tenant in common with them. A 1/3. Now remember, it's not a specific third, is it? It's a 1/3 interest in the whole. All this still sounding good? Okay. What's going to happen if any of the tenants in common die? It's going to go to their heirs unless they stated it otherwise, like a will or something to that effect, right? So what happened on the sale, what happened on the death, okay? Let's go ahead and jump to the other easy one. Let's jump to the other, quality of tenancy in common. Do you remember the concept of partition and why partition might be necessary? If these tenants in common ever decide that they don't like each other, they could sell, right? Any single one of them could sell their 1/3 interest, right? But if they can't get together and do this, they could actually go to the court system and they could seek to partition the property. Partition the property means either dividing it equitably or ordering that it be sold at a public auction. Okay? So that's what partition, and it's associated not only with tenancy in common, but also joint tenancy as well. That's the way you can get out of it. All right, let's go ahead and jump to tenancy by the entirety. And the reason I'm jumping to tenancy by the entirety to be consistent with the way we did this in class, tenancy by the entirety, that is the default for married people acquiring property when? While married. While married. Okay? Can separated persons own property as tenants by the entirety? Yes. Can divorced persons? No. Can divorced persons still own property together? Yes, I don't recommend it, but they can. They just can't be tenants by the entirety. You like that, Dennis? You like where you are on that? Then stay there, okay? Tenancy by the entirety includes the automatic right of what start with the letter S? Survivorship. It's time for you to understand survivorship. If you have been struggling with survivorship, it is time now to understand that survivorship means that when you die, it is not going to your heirs. It's going to your survivor. Your survivor may happen to also be in the same line of succession, but having said that, that's not what mattered. As a matter of fact, even if you had a will that said otherwise, if you own property as tenancy by the entirety, your survivor is getting the property, okay? And in tenancy by the entirety, we're literally talking about the surviving spouse, okay? Tenancy by the entirety. If you want to dig deep in tenancy by the entirety, remember the 5 unities of tenancy by the entirety. M-pits. Marriage is the pits. Marriage, possession, interest, time, and title. Sorry, Paul, I'm not cynical. I'm just trying to help right here at the end. Okay? So, marriage, possession, interest, time, and title. You own the same title at the same time with the same amount of possession. As a matter of fact, it's not like each of you own 50%, right? The marital entity owns all of the whole, correct? All right, do you remember the midterm question that went something like this? My fiance and myself, we purchased a home in Raleigh that will be our marital home. We did not state otherwise in the deed. How are we going to hold title to the property in Raleigh? Tenancy in common. We go down to the beach. We spend our honeymoon at Atlantic Beach. While we're in Atlantic Beach, we buy the condo that we stayed in our honeymoon. How are we going to hold title to that condo? Tenancy by the entirety, because we're now what? Married. We come back to Raleigh. How do we now hold title to the house in Raleigh? It's still tenancy in common, okay? Having said that, my wife says, I want to own this by the entirety. I don't know why she would say that, but let's assume she did. But anyway, we could deed it from ourselves as tenants in common to ourselves as a now married couple, correct? That's the only way we'll get tenancy by the entirety. If you followed all of that, stop. That's as far as you need to go. And then don't forget, clearly joint tenancy is the one where the wills get wobbly on. All right, let's be straightforward about joint tenancy. There are some people who will want to have survivorship that are not married, okay? That's a great place to start. This would include people like brothers and sisters, for example. They might want to own property. Family farm, they might want to own it as joint tenants. If you want joint tenancy, what you're going to have to do is meet the requirements of joint tenancy, and then you need to ask for it to be written where? In the deed. In the deed. It's going to be written. Joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Now, why do you have to do this? Because tenancy in common cannot even legally allow survivorship, can it? Tenancy in common does not even allow for survivorship. Joint tenancy, if you want survivorship and you're not married, joint tenancy is your option. The state of North Carolina says if you want it, we will give it to you, but you have to ask for it in the deed. All right? Now, I get a lot of questions about how the test is going to be tested on this. If we tell you it's joint tenancy, it's safe to assume we mean joint tenants with the right to survivorship, okay? And the reason that's safe is on the national exam, that's where it's tested. It's not tested on the state side. And so what happens is, across the country, use the word joint tenancy implies the fact that it does have the right of survivorship. So don't stay up late at night worrying about that. Stay up late at night worrying about this. Once you got it, go to sleep, because this is as complicated as it's going to get. A, B, and C are joint tenants with right of survivorship, right? Because we told you it's joint tenancy, that is the case. Who can A, sell a property